Hawkins is in danger.
Goodbye, Papa.
For the first time in my life, I think I'm thinking straight.
From Mike. Okay.
Tell her everything.
'86, baby.
It looks like we got ourselves a moron! Let's kill him, Vecna. Slash Henry. Slash one.
So it's a hammer unit.
You see, humans are a unique type of pest. Where others saw order, I saw a straitjacket. A cruel, oppressive world dictated by made-up rules. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, each life, a faded, lesser copy of the one before. Wake up, eat, work, sleep, reproduce, and die. I could make my own rules. To the world, they presented themselves as good, normal people, but like everything else in this world, it was all a lie. A terrible lie. They had done things, 11. Such awful things.
All right, everyone. So now Robin Buckley is back with us. We're going to be talking about Chapter 7, The Massacre at Hawkins Lab, which, by the way, according to IMDb, is the highest rated episode of Stranger Things, not only of season 4, but the last I checked, of I think the series entire. I could be wrong on that.
Really?
Yeah,
That's a surprise to me.
I know.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be like for the whole series.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, pretty popular.
Yeah, evidently.
Yeah. It's like this is definitely like my top 2 of the episodes of the whole series, so like, okay. All right. So, Joyce, Murray, and Yuri enter Kamchatka and witness Hopper and his fellow prisoners fighting the Demogorgon. Hopper holds the creature back with a flaming spear, while Murray and Joyce subdue the guards and open the prison doors, allowing Hopper and Antonov, aka Enzo, to escape. Joyce and Hopper reunite. Dustin, Lucas, and Erica theorize that Vecna has spawned a gate at the site of each murder, which they communicate to Steve's group in the Upside Down. Both parties reunite inside Eddie's trailer at the gate where Chrissy died. Robin and Eddie safely exit, but Vecna possesses Nancy. She discovers that he is Victor Creel's son, Henry, who killed his mother and sister with his psychokinetic powers before falling into a coma and being placed in Brenner's care. Henry became subject number 1 in Brenner's attempts to replicate his powers, and later the orderly that 11 befriended. 11 finally remembers Henry committing the lab massacre and trying to kill her when she refused to help fulfill his murderous ambitions. 11 overpowered Henry and sent him to the Upside Down, where he became Vecna. So, Robin, you have any just initial thoughts on this episode you'd like to share with everyone?
A couple. One thing I thought was interesting, that, and by interesting I mean there's a little bit of side eye and shade going on. I did not absorb until this rewatch that Joseph Quinn, his name is not in the credits.
Oh, really?
No. And I checked. I went back to season 3 because I was like, okay, well, he's new, so maybe, like, I went back to season 3 to see if they put Maya Hawke's name in the credits, and they absolutely did. So maybe it's a screen time question, but I was really surprised by that. I was actually really, really surprised.
Because he was in this episode.
He was in this episode, and I mean, and I don't know if maybe that's like telling of the fact that Maya Hawke like was gonna make it out of season 3 and Quinn does not, but I don't know. So I just thought that was interesting. Other than that, though, I also do want to say that like I am kind of disappointed that Netflix took down the content warning. I kind of wish that they had kept it up at least on this episode, because watching it again,
you see a lot, the entire thing happening like more. It's like pretty much the same as episode 1.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that part of the reason that I say that is because it is a very successfully executed sequence in terms of how horrific it is. And that's why I think the content warning should still be there, because it does still feel like a school shooting even all these months later. And I don't think that's going to change in the same way that like you can watch a film about that exact topic and it still absolutely will feel effective. But this isn't intended to be that. But I think given the context in which it was released, I think I just wish they would leave it up. So I'm a little bummed that they've taken it down. But yeah, I mean, it starts off with such a bang. I love apart from Nancy's completely unnecessary hi there, I love the beginning fight. Like that sequence is fantastic. I adore Erica in this episode. There's not enough of her this season. I just, we need more of Erica Sinclair. Just the facts. I love, so something I actually didn't say about the dive that you really see a lot in this episode is I really, really appreciate the way that they handle the romance, but specifically in that there's a lot of female gaze in this episode. And what I mean by that is compared like to the way that they approach Billy and the way they shoot Billy in season 3, he's very objectified. He's very like dominant in terms of his personality. Like Heidi pointed out over on Coffee and Contemplation that Billy is actually presented in a very male gaze way. And even though he's a dude and not a woman, it's still very, very male gazy in terms of not just him, but everyone's reaction to him. This episode and the one before, like it's very female gaze. And even though the cinematographers and the directors, they're all men. So I was kind of like, well done, very well done, guys. Because so much of what happens like in the boat when Steve like strips off his shirt, like I was, based on the way that the show has treated him for the past 2 seasons, I was fully expecting them to like make a joke at his expense, like low level body shame him. So I was really glad they didn't. And more to the point, there's the joke with Max and the binoculars, but Nancy, even though she like looks up at him and Robin kind of smirks from the other end of the boat, when what she says to him is be careful. And so in this and so what I like about that is the fact that even though there's attraction there, it's also, you could also totally read that as like her realizing he's just about to do this. Like this is a different guy than I knew before. Like, I think you can draw a direct parallel from that moment to what she tells Jonathan at the end of the season with, he's really grown up. Like, I think that's really where that thought first kicks in. So I know that's the dive, but in this episode, I mean, the woman has to patch up the guy. It's such a trope, but they handle it so well that it's not, again, it feels very female gaze. And I really, really appreciated that. And it's one of the reasons why I bought so much of their relationship in this season up until the finale. So yeah, just really appreciated that. I love what they do with that dynamic in this episode. And series favorite moment is in this episode, which is the first part of the conversation between Steve and Eddie in the woods. Not the stuff about the romance, ironically, but the bit where he talks about Dustin. And I mean, nothing brings me more joy than the Steve and Dustin bond. Like that is what is going to keep me coming back to Stranger Things until the very end of it. Like I adore that so much. Just, I don't know. I just love it. I love it so much. So I love that exchange. And yeah, the whole trapped up in the upside down plot with Justin Lucas and Erica finding them and the communicating, that all that is just fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. I love the way how it's exciting and engaging, but it does move the story forward, and there's like, there's plot progression and there's world building, and it's just again, I'm going to say it again, the Hawkins group is the strongest this season. It's so good. Although I did wonder why Max's mother isn't there. Like, why wasn't she at town hall? Why isn't she here? I don't know. And I might have a
Yeah.
question for you later about the device in Henry's neck, but
Oh, awesome.
we'll get there.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, lay it on me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love talking about that. So
Okay, cool. Then we will revisit that. But yeah, those are basically my overall thoughts on the
yeah.
episode.
So speaking of the Upside Down, Steve at the end of episode 6 got pulled into the Upside Down by the tendril. We think he's going to die. Finally, all these bats. Nancy, Robin, and Eddie jump in, rescue him from the bats, and we spent a lot of time in the Upside Down in this one episode alone, probably more than we have really since season 2, and even then we didn't really see that much. We see a lot more of Hawkins Upside Down this season in this episode, and the environment down there it's a lot worse than the last time that we saw it. And yeah, so what did you think of the Upside Down in this episode? And when you first watched it, did you notice the roaring in the background?
Not really. It's funny. I mean, the earthquakes were far more of what got my attention, but honestly, I didn't pay much attention to the Upside Down as in terms of its details. I both times I've watched this episode, it's been, or all 3 times, I've been more just entirely focused on the characters and what's been going on, like, interpersonally with them. So I didn't really take much notice of that apart from, like I said, the earthquakes. But yeah, the roaring was interesting.
Yeah, I didn't really notice it either. Actually, I was watching a YouTube video that was breaking down this episode, or was breaking down Vecna, and the host of the video was the one that actually pointed it out of, you know, could this be the monster that Nancy saw that we could see next season? And then I went back and rewatched episode 7. And I was like, oh my gosh, that does sound like a creature. But yeah, I didn't notice it either. I was mostly focused on the earthquake uh, because we hadn't seen that before in the Upside Down. But yeah, so I thought it was interesting. I didn't know if you also noticed it. And it's one of those things where unless you're just really paying attention, you can't really uh tell. But now that has been pointed out, now I notice it when I watch this episode. So
My only question would be, like, just I guess in terms of, the monster that Nancy's talking about. Like, I mean, Steve even has the comment about, like, how it's all connected. So I would wonder, like, is it connected to Vecna?
mhm.
Is it all kind of combined? Because, like, there's the stuff that's in Russia, and then there's the stuff that's here. So that would
Yeah.
be, I mean, I would assume that it's all interconnected, but we'll see what happens.
And also sticking on the subject of the Upside Down, probably one of the bigger happenings in this episode that people are still talking about is we learn in this episode that the Upside Down is stuck in 1983 on the day that Will went missing. So I know, Robin, you said that you're not much for theories, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But just real quick, if you had to take a guess, what would be your guess as to why the Upside Down is stuck in 1983, or really I think the better way to phrase this would be kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg. So is it because is that because when Will was taken and he had something to do with it? Or if it's because that was the same day that 11 opened the gate. So
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not much for theories, but I actually have spent a lot of time pondering this, just kind of in general. I will admit that when this happened in the show, the first time I saw it, I was actually really surprised to learn that they happened on the same day. It had always been my impression that there was a bigger time gap between her opening the gate and escaping the lab. Like, I always thought there were like a couple of days between those two events. So that was a surprise to me, and I'm not sure that I kind of prefer that idea, but doesn't matter. It didn't happen that way, so whatever. But I mean, if I had my preference, between the two, which do I find more compelling? I like the idea better that it would be, or I'm more intrigued by the possibility that it has something to do with Will, because one of the things that I find interesting about the series as a whole, is that we haven't really talked about that at all. We haven't really I know there's a whole comic about what happened to him in the Upside Down, but in the show we have not seen them talk about that. I mean, and it makes sense to a degree. Like, Will probably wouldn't want to talk about it, and we don't see him talking to a counselor like we saw Max doing in this season. But I'm beginning to wonder if there's a reason they haven't addressed it, is because there's something significant to it. I would like to see Will take more of center stage in season 5. I find that he is I really think they underuse him, and I would like to see him have more of a central arc, and to have an arc that doesn't have to do with him being queer and doesn't have to do with him having unrequited love for somebody that he can absolutely do better than. Yeah. It's a controversial statement, I know. It's not I just feel like Will can do better. But I would like to see him have maybe an arc that doesn't have to do with him suffering, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's just untapped potential there, and we've seen all the stuff with Elle. I feel like if it has to do with her opening the gate, it's like more about that. It's just, there's so much about that. Now, what would be kind of cool is if it actually has something to do with them both happening at the same time. Like, that could be interesting. But I will admit that it did occur to me, and this is a more cynical approach, but it did occur to me, if it, like, initially I wondered, maybe this doesn't actually mean anything. Like they've since said it's going to be a thing, capital T thing, as season 5, that we're going to revisit it. But until they said that, I actually had been like, I could totally believe it if literally it was just because it was just plot mechanics. Like, we have to get the older teens to the Wheeler house so they can chat with the younger teens, but they can't actually have weapons because then they won't stay there. And then they have weapons, and then they're much more capable. Then they have these tools that they can use, and they'd have more capability. So, they can't go back to Watergate. So time travel, so they just did something so that they literally couldn't have that. But it sounds like that isn't the case. So I really hope that it turns out to mean something.
Yeah, I do as well. Personally, I think when I watch episode 7, it always looks to me like they went out of their way to tell us that the Upside Down is stuck in 1983. Because it's like Eddie suggested, like, why don't we just go to the police station, grab the weapons and go? And Nancy's like, no, well, I have guns, I have weapons. And they get there, and she doesn't, because they don't exist yet. But the only thing that stops me from fully believing that Will, has something to do with the Upside Down being stuck at that time, and also I've also seen theory of the Upside Down looks like Hawkins, because when Will was in there, he did something to create that look. And I always go back to season 1 when he first gets there, and he manages to call Joyce on the phone, and he tells her, it looks just like our world except it's cold and dark. And it's like, I don't really think he would have said that in that way if he had something to do with it looking like it does. So I don't really buy into that theory per
I
se.
I agree with you
But
on that.
I really actually don't even think it even has anything to do with 11 opening the gate. I think it has something to do with Vecna. I mean,
Mhm.
that's really, uh, I think it ties back into him. Now, how? I don't know.
I mean,
But
he does. He does say the bit about like, and we'll get into this a little bit in a minute, I guess. But he alludes to this idea that he has some control of time. So, I mean, his symbol is a clock,
mhm,
right? So, it, yeah, that's very possible. Yeah, like. I mean, between those two ideas, I prefer that it having something to do with will, but I mean, yeah, like it could absolutely have nothing to do with either of them.
yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they answer this question because I mean, it seems like the Duffer Brothers are really looking forward to revealing the answer next season. They've brought it up a lot of times, and they've said like we're going to talk about that next season. So yeah, I'm very my interest is very piqued about
Yeah,
this.
I find that it's a really intriguing concept. I remember that I had been very apprehensive about I mean, I actually love time travel. Like Doctor Who is one of my favorite
Hmm.
series. I do enjoy time travel narratives, but I do think they're incredibly difficult to pull off. Like they're really really tricky because the world building and the magic or science fiction behind time travel is so
Hmm.
difficult to get it right. And usually it has to do with the impacts thereof. So I was considering that we saw that there is a clock in the trailers. I was really nervous, like, please don't do time travel, don't do it. It's because it could get so messy so
Yeah,
quickly, because I have seen that a lot. But when they threw this in, this was like I was kind of like, okay, all right, that's a different way to come at it. I actually really like it. I'm really intrigued. I want to see what they do with it. It's not I would never have predicted them doing this. I mean, I'm not good at predicting things anyway, but this was a really like well delivered curveball. It was like, wow, okay, cool. And I'm very intrigued. I really want to see what they do with it. And again, not even necessarily so much about the how it happened, but how does that affect us moving forward? Because
yes,
I know there are some theories out there now that this could mean that ultimately the end of the series is that it rewinds time so that none of this ever happened.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how I feel about that possibility. But yeah, like it presents a whole lot of really interesting possibilities. So yeah, I'm excited to see where they take it.
So, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on the Vecna simultaneous monologue that he gave Nancy, both Nancy and 11, at different years, but at the same time?
Uh yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, the first thing I have to say though straight out the gate is just I mean, dude, Jimmy Campbell Bower's transformation,
Yes.
his performance is incredible. Like anything else aside, like just that alone is remarkable. Like he
Mm,
drives that whole sequence, and yeah, like his performance and his just what he's doing with his face, but also like the way that I think he is supported by the cinematography, by the lighting, by the framing, the way that they allow him to eat up the space. It's really 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 well done. And I like the way that also like the cinematography isn't super flashy through there, like the lights flash, but like they don't do a whole lot of like camera tricks through that sequence. It's a lot of just like extreme close-ups. It's a lot of just letting him own the frame. Like it's just really impressive. So I like that just the way that those two, that his performance and the visual presentation are just handled so synergistically. That's amazing. um I know that a lot of people rag on how long and expository the monologue is. Both of my co-hosts in our reaction episodes on Coffee and Contemplation, Jenna and Heidi, they both thought that not just the Vecna voiceover, but also part of the monologue itself is delivered to Nancy as well as Elle. Maybe that's true. I don't personally agree with that. I especially after what we saw in the beginning of Volume 2 with Chapter 8. where Vecna finally does address Nancy directly, and she's
Mm.
like super surprised. But what bothers me about this monologue and about a lot of the Nina flashbacks in general is that 11, by the Duffers calculations, is 9, and by my math she's 8 at the oldest. You know, the math isn't mathing, but like depending on the time of year, depending on 11's birthday, which I don't know if that doesn't make me a real fan because I don't know her birthday, but you know, depending on her birthday, depending on the time of year, she could even be 7 here. So when we meet her in season 1, she doesn't even know what the word friend means. She doesn't understand the word promise. So when Henry says we could reshape the world, all she's ever known is the Hawkins Lab. She doesn't, like, what does that even mean to her? Like, he's delivering these, I mean, the writing of the speech is beautiful. Like, it's a very elegant speech. It's very eloquent. He's delivering it beautifully. But I'm like, I don't think she's understanding within the inner logic of the world that they've created. How much of it does she even comprehend? Like, all I think that that's part of where the contrivance of the Nina project gets messy, because I even think based on even the way it's written, to me, that speech is not written for 7-year-old 11, or sorry, 9-year-old 11. That speech is written for 14-year-old 11. It's based on the word choices. So if that's true, then one of the ways that I kind of have to warp how I see this sequence to make it fundamentally work for me as a viewer is to say he is talking to 14-year-old 11, that he has somehow messed with time so that he is actually in her, but then he's in her psyche at that point. So you could buy that, that he's actually in her mind and he is talking to her present day self. But back in Hawkins' lab, all that he said was like something along the lines of I told you to wait, and all she sees is all these dead kids, and so she just makes that decision. Yeah, so the monologue itself pushes the believability to me, even in a show with giant tentacle monsters, but it's them kind of contradicting themselves in a pretty glaring way. It doesn't seem to bother a lot of other people, but I find that it really was jarring for me when I first watched it. It still is. So I don't actually like, I'm like messy about it, because, and I said it in chapter 6, like the stuff with 11 as a whole feels messy. This is no exception. And it bums me out a little bit, because I actually really think how so much of this is so well performed, and it's so well shot, and the music is amazing, and it's the tension and the pacing, the editing of it, it's so well put together. But there's so much about it that that doesn't like click, that kind of doesn't really work, that sticks out to me. So bottom line, I don't mind the lore itself. I think it's one hell of a reveal. But I think despite the visual presentation being so cool, I do think it's also a little clunky, just a little bit.
Yeah, like I love the reveal. I love the delivery from Jamie Kimmel Bower. But yeah, like you, this was the whole Nina project in general was very confusing for me. And this is part of the reason why, is because I kept, and even now when I rewatch it, I have to go, okay, so this is like 7, 8, 9-year-old child here. This is not present day, even though present day Millie Bobby Brown is playing in the memories of the child, if that makes sense. And so, I mean, I do credit Millie for like some of the phrases are like what an 8-year-old child would say, like when she says, Papa said Mama died making me. Like that is definitely something a child would say, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also, just as a side note to that, I will also add that part of what makes his transformation here so powerful is also in his performance, is the fact that up until this point, I would actually say that he's been performing his role as if he is speaking to a much younger child. So credit to
Yes.
Bauer in that regard too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also I still have to remind myself, like, these are all from security cam footage. Like, there's probably no audio on them, or at least none like this that she would be able to pick up. So it's like I keep having to go back to question, did he really say all these things to
Right.
her, or is this like her present interpretation of it as a teenager who
Mhm.
has been educated, properly? Yeah, there's just, again, I'm still
But
very confused on how the Nina project, that Nina tank actually works, how she's able to immerse herself into the memories. I think the Duffer Brothers did kind of what I usually do, is they have these big ideas, and once they get there to film them, they kind of run into an issue of, how do we make it believable? And it's like, well, we can't really make it 100% believable, but we already wrote it in there, and we already have production make all this stuff, so we're just going to go do it anyway, and just, we know we have the music and the cinematography that will make it not as noticeable of continuity issues, if that makes sense. So,
yeah,
yeah.
I think I mean, maybe one of the ways to look at it, I'm thinking of this as of this exact moment, that maybe one of the things that you can also maybe look at this scene with is an idea that his power is psychic based, or at least part of it is.
Mhm.
So maybe there's a possibility that part of the way he was able to communicate these ideas to her was even at age 9, he was able to somehow use his psychic power to communicate with her, even though he's saying it all out loud. But
Mhm.
again, thematically, none of this, like thematically, like subject wise, none of this is relevant to her. All the stuff about, I was different too, and it's like the stuff with her being bullied, like I guess is what they're going off of. But to me, that feels like the way it's presented between 6 and 7, and I was looking for this, that seems like something out of the ordinary. Like that didn't seem like this is happening all the time. And even just by contrast, that's been her whole experience up until this point. That's literally how the season starts, is her feeling all of those things. That's what she's dealing with now in 1986. So and I'm fine with that as a theme. I mean, I'm not. I don't love the retread of "I am the monster." Like I don't love that, because that was a huge theme of season 2, and we're just pretending like that didn't happen. So we have to re-examine it here, like it's totally fresh, but it's not. That was the entire point of the Lost Sister episode.
Mhm.
So and there's like no connective tissue there, but if you're gonna go with that, cool. Like I don't like it, depending on how you handle it, it can be fine. I wasn't super on board for the Steve and Nancy rekindling of romance either, but they handled that really well up to a point. So in this case, it was kind of like, well, if thematically that's what you're going after, I like something that I know that I talked about a lot in season 1 was Jonathan and the photos. And him taking those pictures. And I think we talked about that in chapter 4 a little bit of this season. But something that got said over on Coffee Contemplation once was that, like Heidi said, that she was like, I have to pretend like to a degree that just didn't happen in order to move forward with the story. I just kind of have to willfully just ignore it, because otherwise it makes everything too messy. And I kind of feel like with this, it's very similar in that in order to make it make sense for myself, I have to just headcanon that he is talking to present day 11, that he's futzing with time, and he's speaking to her in the present. And I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. I actually find that if that is what happened, I dig it. I actually think that's a much more interesting way to come at this than, yeah, he monologued for like 10 minutes straight to an 8 or 9-year-old. Like, what? Okay, fine. Like, it's not the length, honestly. It's not. It's the content of the speech.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, like she doesn't know what the word promise means, like as a concept. She doesn't understand the concept of it when Mike says that to her. And that's when Mike is spending a lot of time like explaining things and laying it out. Like, but she's gonna follow that whole monologue? No, that doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. That was a rant and a half. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. This is good stuff. So on the flip side of that monologue coin, Vecna brings Nancy into the fold. So why do you think Vecna targeted Nancy specifically to do that?
I really don't know. I mean, I think based on what happens in chapter 8, it's possible that he deduced that she would be the best messenger for what he wants to communicate. And my headcanon is that, well, he's also aware that like that stuff is on the surface of Nancy's mind, so it was easier for him to get to it because of what's going on between her and Steve. Like she might kind of be thinking about that night and what happened, and she might be thinking about Barb, and I mean that could even be on the surface of her mind because that was a huge part of what drove her to approach journalism, and so she's remembering why she got into journalism in the first place. So she's been thinking about Barb lately. But yeah, I don't know why, but that scene in the pool, man, that is brutal and awesome. Like, yeah, like when it just that set of her in that giant pool, like that was fantastic. What do you think? Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I think a lot of it does have to do with what happens in episode 8 and what he shows Nancy specifically. And I think, and also going into season 5, I think it's because Nancy still holds the guilt of Barb. And I mean, we know that Max was clearly meant to be his fourth, so it wasn't Nancy. But I think Vecna still wanted Nancy to know that he has, been behind everything, and he knows that, what happened to Barb, and he knows what they're doing now. And I think he's basically like, I think he knows that Nancy is like the ringleader of the investigation into him, into all this. And I think he's like, well, if I can just get Nancy to get off my trail, then they'll leave me alone. If I can intimidate her and use what happened to Barb against her, and then, because I know 11 doesn't have her powers, so there's nothing she can do about it, then I can do what I need to do. That's kind of how I took it. So
yeah, it's also possible that she, just hearing you say that, it makes me wonder if it's like if we're applying the D&D sort of filter to everything, like Nancy probably has a super high intelligence ability score, so it's certainly higher than Steve's. Like I think Steve has a high I would say Steve has a high wisdom score. His perception is off the charts, which we see in this episode. But in terms of like intelligence, I think Nancy was probably like able to put all of what he was going to show her together.
Yeah, and too, I think it also has something to do with maybe the fact that she went and visited his father. I think that could have also had, because he says, I see you've visited blind old dumb Victor. Like, okay. And it's like, I wonder if Victor Creel only knew what became of his son. Like, I just pains me to think about what his reaction would be to that,
I mean, it's also funny to remember that I think that was also the moment, like when he says that and Nancy goes into the house, like that's the first moment I think, like in chronologically, that it's revealed that he's Henry as well. Because that was the thing. I think that was the biggest surprise for me, that like, oh, he's all three of them. Like, it was very easy to be like, okay, yeah, he's Vecna and he's one, totally get that. But then also to find out that he was Henry, I was like, I'm sure
Yes.
a lot of people probably had figured it out before then. But for me, that I remember we all kind of collectively gasped in the room. Like, it was sort of like, or maybe not all of us gasped, but there was definitely a sense of like, oh, okay. Like, I was surprised. I was really surprised in that moment.
So was I, especially when the camera panned to the child. I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
they're really doing this. But
Mhm.
that's again, I enjoyed the reveal because it was a good who done it.
Mhm.
If they kind of try to point you in one direction and then bam, it's totally not someone you would ever think.
And
you know
in terms of, we've talked a little bit about the bloat and like where things could have been trimmed. Like, the idea too that he is all three, in addition to then the future reveal that we get in volume 2, like, it's actually makes so much more sense this way. Like, this idea that it's like not three separate people and that they all are doing all these different things, like to have it all kind of come from the same source. I was like, this is so much better than whatever I thought they were building towards. Like, to
yeah
have it be this like super condensed, like it's one dude. Um, I have some other mixed thoughts about him also being the mind flayer, but that's that's more a volume 2 discussion. But yeah.
yeah and
But
and also to that, I think that's something that has not completely been fleshed out yet. I think that's
mhm.
something we'll have to definitely wait till next season to get the
Yeah.
full
Oh
scope
yeah.
on. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this episode, like I mentioned earlier, very popular episode. It's a fan favorite. It's one of my favorites. But it's good at it takes everything that we've seen in like the first 6 episodes and wraps all that up into one, but still gives enough cliffhanger to keep you guessing as to what could come next. So a lot of fans out there have said, well, they could have just ended season 4 right here at this episode, and it could have been just fine. So do you believe that episodes 8 and 9 were necessary to get us into season 5, or could it just ended at episode 7?
So uh you actually presented me with this idea ahead of time, and I actually spent a lot of time thinking about it, because my initial reaction was, yeah, because I actually remember having that conversation with a couple people myself, like right after, like in the waiting for volume 2.
Mhm.
um and even when you presented me with the question, I was kind of like, yeah, I think they probably could have ended it here. But spending a little more time thinking about it, I think the last 2 episodes are very worthwhile, but I think the bigger I don't think it's a so much a question of, did we need the last 2 episodes? I mean, I really think that, like, if given the choice to change the structure of the season, it wouldn't have been a question of end it here or end it there. I think for me, it's a question of trim the whole season down overall. There is a lot of nips and tucks they could have made all throughout that would have made it feel less necessary to. This wouldn't have been quite so long into the season if there had been other things that had been trimmed down. And I think there's a lot of moments throughout the first volume that could have been condensed
Mhm.
and like more efficiently approached to avoid that bloat and to streamline the season overall. Like, that's really where I come down on it, because but that said, if nothing did get trimmed, then it could have been a season finale. I think that would have been really ballsy of them, because and this was kind of where, working through my thought process on it, I was kind of like, the more I think about it, no, I actually don't think this would have been. I think it would have been a short-term gain, long-term loss, because even though it ends on this like huge reveal, there is still so much that's open-ended, like, and not in necessarily just a cliffhangery way. It's because it's not just like 1 or 2 subplots. Every single plot line is hanging on off of the cliff. So there really isn't a conclusion to the narrative here. It would have been kind of a cliffhanger in the very, very, very traditional sense of the word.
Mhm.
And that might have worked and satisfied a lot of viewers, but I think ending where they did with chapter 9, I think it, it ultimately serves the forthcoming time jump a lot better. And given where the season ends, I think that would have been a really rough way to start the next season, because it's like, again, thinking ahead, like by the time you get to, again, like talking spoilers, like by the time you get to Eddie's death, by the time you get to Max's death, death in air quotes, all of that loss, all of that heartbreak, you've already gone through the whole season. Like you're at the end of a story there. Whereas if they had opened with that and changed nothing else, I think a lot of viewers might have bailed. Like, I don't know that people would have gone all the way through the season after that.
Mhm.
And I'm not speaking, that's not hyperbole. Like, I really do think they would have lost a lot of viewers after that, because I know myself, speaking personally, but also from a lot of like fan reaction that I've seen, a lot of folks are a little bit hesitant about how they're going to approach season 5 because of a lot of the choices they made in terms of the ending of season
Mhm.
4. So, I think that would have affected not so much this season, but where they began season 5. So I think that's why I say short-term gain, long-term loss. So long story short, I actually come down on I don't actually think that it would have been the wise move to end it here. But I do think that the season, like I said, it's overall it's a little too long, and that given the chance to change the structure, I would have opted for cutting it down rather than ending it sooner. But I do think that it made it a really interesting. I think part of the reason that it feels like it would have worked is because we did get volume 2 so soon. But if we'd had to wait 2 years for that, and then we wait 2 years and then immediately with these 2 huge character deaths, like that would have been a lot to deal with. Like, I don't think that would have been
Yeah.
satisfying. So I don't know. But that said, I mean, if they'd ended it here, maybe those deaths wouldn't have happened. And if that
Yeah.
was the case, absolutely do
True.
that instead.
Yeah, I agree. Looking back
Yeah.
on it now, I totally agree, especially because of the longer episodes. Like, I think if it had been like normal size episodes like they did first 3 seasons, I think um you could definitely uh kind of make a case for it. Um, especially if you didn't have anything that happened in episodes 8 or 9. Like if you just put those to the side and just had just this, I think you could make an argument for it. But the way the season went, yeah, I don't. I think especially episode 8, you definitely needed uh, to happen soon after. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So you
Yeah.
ready to play a little game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Let's do it.
whose line is it anyway?
Yeah. Yeah.
You did such a good job on the dive, so let's see if you could do a really good job on this
Okay. We'll see.
one. We're running out of time here, Martin. Hawkins is running out of time.
That sounds like Dr. Owens to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Who I really
Uh,
hope is still alive.
yeah, I hope he comes back next season because they just left that one up to question.
Yep. Open-ended.
um, Dusty. Someone was just murdered there.
That sounds like Mrs. Henderson or Miss Henderson.
Yeah.
Yeah. During that couch interrogation scene.
Yes. Um,
See, like that was humorous and I didn't mind it. It worked.
threaten them with a little jail time. Maybe that'll loosen their lips.
That's Ted Wheeler, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, I think that's the same scene.
I actually think Ted might have gotten a little bit more screen time than Karen this season, to be honest with you.
More lines, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Uh, Let's see. Trying to find a good one. Oh, that was a real Aussie move you pulled back there.
Oh, that's Eddie. That's in that favorite scene of mine.
Yes. All right, last one. Either you tell me what's happening or I'll tell Dustin what I found under your bed.
Oh, that is Miss Erica. I love
Yes.
that scene, man. That scene is so great. Again, shout out to Matarazzo. Like that head whip he does to Lucas. That's amazing.
Yes.
What'd you find under your bed? Oh, it's so good. Yeah, that
So
was good.
I have just like 2 more questions I want to ask you before we conclude this wonderful episode today. The
Okay.
first one being, why do you think Henry didn't kill Brenner when he murdered everyone else in the lab? Like, do you think he thought Brenner was dead after he busted open the door? Or, because, like, why do you think Brenner did not receive what we now know, the Vecna treatment?
That is a beautiful question. I honestly have no idea because like I went into rewatching this episode fully expecting to have it be that he just didn't get to Brenner yet, but it's like no, he absolutely did. So because he's just lying there when Elle sees him. So I don't know. I find that really hard to understand because it doesn't make sense to me. Like I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and have, presume that there is a reason, but yeah, I mean even him killing all of the children feels a little bit like I would like to know more about his motivation with that. Um like honestly the monologue that he gives to 11 almost feels like it would have been equally as effective to have that conversation with 2. But two because 2 is powerful but I mean like I'm also curious like what was their relationship, like how does 2 not know who 1 is, like that, like there's just a bunch of like those kinds of questions that I have, and that's not even like well how come, I just mean like I'm just curious, like I'm genuinely just interested, like that would be a just an interest question that I have, like why don't they know each other, or if they do, like what was their relationship, like how did we end up here, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know why he didn't kill Brenner. And
Yeah, I
I mean
really hope we get a lot of more Brenner flashbacks next season, specifically with Henry. Because now we know, I think, 99% of 11's story now, and now it's like, well, let's learn about the flip side of that coin with Henry. Let's learn about the 20-year gap, if you will, and hopefully we'll get to see that next season, because it's very intriguing to me that
yeah
he didn't kill Brenner, which at that time was, you would think, out of all the people, he would have been the first to go. You know what I mean?
yeah that feels a little bit like they kind of wrote themselves into a corner with that one, because he can't be up and around to be part of the scene in the Rainbow Room, the monologue, but
Mhm.
at the same time they can't kill him because we have the first 3 seasons. So yeah, that feels like they kind of got themselves backed into a plot corner and they didn't know what to do. So maybe the easiest thing to believe, but it's not though. I was gonna say the easiest thing to believe is that it is like you suggested, like he thought Brenner was dead, but Vecna's not really all that easy to fool in that regard. So, and like you said, he doesn't have the whole bent bones, eyes, gouged out treatment. So yeah, it's very weird. Like it would have made a lot more sense to me if like Brenner had been like placed almost like what happens in the season 2 Massacre with the Demodogs. Like if Brenner went into like a protective room and then like Vecna, or as I like to refer to him, VH1, just didn't get to him yet. Like he had to deal with Elle, and then once he had dealt with Elle one way or the other, that was fully his next move, was to go find Brenner. But
Yeah.
nope, not what happened.
So, do you think there's any plausibility in what Henry told Eleven about Brenner wanting the other kids to kill her? Do you think Brenner really wanted that to happen?
No, not at all. Because I don't think Brenner would want to waste valuable property. I think that's how he sees 11. I think that's how he sees all of the kids. I think that's the reason that the massacre is devastating for him, is because it's a loss of all of these assets, all of his work. I don't think he, like, I think having them play the like political power games amongst themselves is one thing, but to let them kill her, his most powerful pupil, I don't think he would ever let them do that. I think that's why he was so mad, actually, with 2. So, like,
yeah, I agree.
But I also think that like everything he says, that's all what Vecna's thinking. That's all Henry's own. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. He's the one that let them out of their rooms. He's the one that turned off the cameras. Yeah. Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that as well. I mean, it's just, there's no way around, because I think he at that point, I think he knew, okay, 11's ready to help me kill everyone and conquer the world. So
at 9, okay.
yeah. So
Like,
you brought up Soteria. You want to talk about that real quick before we end today's episode?
I'm sorry, I brought up what?
The Soteria, the chip.
Oh, yes. So like I just can't imagine that that's not going to be a part of season 5. That's probably, I mean, I will be shocked if it's not. I am shocked that I completely forgot about it until we're doing the rewatch, and that it was like, how come that doesn't come up in volume 2 when they're talking about her going after Vecna? I'm like, why is this not even mentioned, that there is technology that can subdue him? Why is that not a thing? Like, why does that not come up later?
Yeah.
Like, that's a much more interesting conversation for them to have later on, rather than just, I'm the monster, you're the monster, he's the monster, we're all the monster. Like, like that, you're not ready. Yes, I am. I don't have a choice. Like,
And I think it's kind of funny too, because, he talks about how controlling Brenner is, which is true. I mean, what Brenner is doing is not morally or ethically right, with the way he kidnapped these children and whatnot and what he's doing to them. But so far, to our knowledge, Henry is the only one that has this chip implanted in him. Not even, 8 didn't have one because she was able to escape the lab. 11 didn't, because she was also able to escape, and that's why they couldn't find her, because they didn't have the tracking device or whatever on there. So clearly, Brenner wasn't really worried about any of the other children, either leaving or using their powers. It was just him. So clearly, Henry did something prior to the Massacre at Hawkins Lab that probably made Brenner go, we probably should never ever let this guy get out and have the abilities to use his powers, because bad things could happen.
I mean, I wonder if he figured it out himself, that he's the one that killed his mother and sister. Maybe Brenner just kind of went, that's probably him.
Yeah.
Given that he was studying his powers, and it was like, oh, you have the power to create illusions, to get in people's heads, and you can really, like, you can really do damage to their physical persons. So that was probably you.
yeah, I have no doubt that Brenner knew what he did.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, anything you would like to tell the people before we go?
Just in the event that this is the last time I'm on the podcast, just it's been a blast. Thanks for having me on again and again. And yeah, like I am really eager to see what they do with season 5, but I'm apprehensive, and I will probably, for the first time in Stranger Things history for me, I probably will look up spoilers before I watch it. I probably won't watch it immediately, just because I am really worried about people living or dying in this show, and I haven't been before. So, and not just if they live or die, but also like how that is handled. So, but yeah, it's volume 1 overall. Like even with the bloat and everything, it was really enjoyable. So,
yeah. So, season 5 comes around. You can hop back on here. We can recap season 5. So, thank you so much, Robin, for joining me today, and see you around. And everyone, don't forget to watch these episodes. You don't want to miss them. Bye.
Bye.